first of all, I wanted to thank you all for coming. This is a great turnout to get us started and really appreciate that. My name is Declan, and I'm here representing the drinks community today. The drinks community is a platform that works through the Drinks Trust, a very important charity to the UK on trade. And the drinks community is very much one of the only neutral voices that we have ploughing through the industry as well. So if you haven't searched it, do have a good look at it. There's a lot of resources on there and a lot of best sharing of practices and like-minded creatures at work. So I do recommend having a look. But the purpose of why I'm sat here today is we've got a panel and we're going to be talking about the very important topic of your own ego. Building your own personal brand. The thing that so many people say they don't do, but they've got an Instagram account and they do posts and they're talking about themselves, but they don't do anything about their own brand. Of course not. Now, I'm not great in this area, so the key is you bring some people in who can talk and are absolute experts. So I'll introduce them, and then I'm going to get them both individually to give their thoughts on building a personal brand and their own story. So on my left here, well, they're both on my left, but on my nearest left is the esteemed Rebekkah Dooley. She is now working as a freelance marketing guru, has got notable experiences such as spearheading the communication of such bars as Crowther and the Dead Rabbit, also the Edition Hotel, recently the Cadogan Arms as well, which is a great place. So Rebekkah is going to be giving us a very, very insightful and honest look, because not only has she been managing her own persona, she's been managing some pretty big personas along the way, and maybe a couple of egos encountered on that route as well.
Definitely that, yeah.
Naming no names. Furthest left, I've got someone representing a very important part of the drinks world, the wine world. Probably an area that still approaches the on-trade differently to the bar world. So we've got Harry Crowther, who has got his own business, Grape to Grain, who is really his goal, and forgive me if I'm stealing your thunder here, Harry, but his goal is really a revolution in the wine world and how people can, rather than just plunk wines on a list, use the list base better, engage guests better, and make them more profitable as well. How's that for a bit of a slogan, Harry?
Yeah, it's not bad. It's getting there. Yeah, getting there.
You know, maybe I could be your PA on this one. So the topic is personal brand building. I myself have worked in the industry for a number of years, and I've really seen, particularly I had a period working at the Savoy Hotel where anyone who would come and work there, they naturally would get a bit of a leg up in the industry in the sense they're working somewhere very well known, and I've watched a number of those people over the years build their own name, their own career. A recent great example is that of Joe Schofield, who was there. He was a bartender, worked there, started to build up his own persona, traveled the world, won a few awards along the way, and recently opened an amazing bar called Schofield. So I think if you want an end game, having a bar named after you is a pretty good one. But that's enough from me now. Rebekkah, could you give the floor really your story and perspective on this?
Okay, Declan, thank you for the introduction. I think it made me turn a bit bright red, so hopefully that's faded. Now, my name's Rebekkah. I've worked in hospitality for almost 20 years now, and for the past 10 years in marketing. So I've worked for brands like the Dead Rabbit, where branding is a core part of the bar success. We used to say it was the trifecta, and branding was 1/3 of that. So marketing was 1/3 of what was the most important things to the Dead Rabbit. Also for Crowther, and now as a freelancer for brands and venues around London. I suppose the thing that I focus on the most with marketing is brand identity, brand image, website, social media. So how many of you have social media accounts? Does anyone not have an Instagram? Do you use it for your personal branding or for work? For work, for both. So I think we'll go into that a bit more deeply with Declan when we have some questions about how to separate your brand from your business. Harry, do you want to do a little intro of yourself?
So hi guys, so I'm Harry, lovely to meet you all. I I've been working in the wine trade for about 10 years or so. I started scrubbing tanks in New Zealand. After I graduated uni, I couldn't be asked to read any more books. So I went to the Southern Hemisphere and just learned about wine from source, which I think is really important. And I think going forward in terms of building your own brand, for me, in the wine sector, a lot of people, I think, have bought into my journey because I've learned it from the grassroots production side of it instead of just being book smart, and I think that was quite an important, certainly for me. Also, I do find reading a little bit boring sometimes as well, so I thought that was really important for me. Going forwards, I've been wine director for a number of London-based sort of restaurant groups, and then I've been consulting mostly casual dining and cocktail-led business models, but on their wine category. And I think what a lot of what a lot of these businesses have is a fantastic, obviously, turnover and a fantastic business model, but say the wine sales are only 10%. But if you're working with a customer or a business where their turnover is £50 million a year, even the 10% wine turnover is quite a significant part of that. So if you can just add a little bit onto that, then it becomes quite an important part of the business growth. But it very often is so much of a backseat project for those guys because their focus is spirits and cocktails, so on and so forth. So working with those guys has really sort of brought me down the road of grain to grape, which is where I was then specialising in training and nurturing and just trying to communicate wine in my tone of voice to the bar community. And that's sort of where it all started, and then it's kind of snowballed from there, I guess.
Very good, thank you. So we will at the end have an opportunity for Q&As. What I have got now is a few kind of leading questions to each member of the panel. And I'm going to go first off to you, Rebekkah. And this is about working alongside brands, clients. How do you navigate brand values and align them to your own? And is it important, or is it about a paycheck?
It's definitely important. I have an example of this recently, so I'm not going to mention any names. But I was asked to write about a panel discussion, not too dissimilar to this, except it was 7 men. And it was about the future of hospitality. And it was organized by a brand. And so I went back and said, no, the future of hospitality is not 7 men. And I was kind of amazed that they thought that that was okay, and said that I wouldn't write about it. So they changed it and made it gender balanced. So getting a paycheck is great, and I think especially when you're starting out, there are times when you might have to compromise a bit. But if you have the ability, if you're able to say, no, I don't agree with this, I don't want to do it, then those things are going to stay with you long term. So I think it's a really important thing to consider.
And in terms of this alignment between a client and yourself, would you specifically say, look at a bar and think, that's me, yeah, I want to be a part of that? Or would you do a clash?
No, I think it's important to have goals. If you think there's an amazing bar that you'd love to work with, their branding's really cool, their drinks are really cool, and you'd be like, I really want to work with that person. But equally, it could be somewhere unknown, someone that you're not necessarily familiar with, that comes to you and you like what they do. So I think it's just about balancing both of those things, really.
Very good. And do you reckon a venue benefits from being attached to you or a brand?
No, I would never say that.
Why not?
That would be really egotistical, but no, I think in a way it can be, I think it can be detrimental. You want your work to speak for you. It's better to just do a good job, and the ego side of it, I think, is just not pleasant, gets in the way.
Very, very tactfully answered. Quite a tough question, sorry, as well. But,
that wasn't on the list, Declan.
Oh, there's going to be a few of those. Harry, the next question's over to you, and quite important. I find the aspect of social media very time-consuming. I deleted a load because I realised I was wasting time as I should be with my kids and just looking at comments people are making on Facebook. But how do you use social media? What forms do you use? What do you think is the most important, if there is such a thing?
Yeah, definitely some are more important than others. Sadly, I think certainly in my experience, first thing you need to do is to target the decision makers that are going to get you a job or get you a contract. And so in my experience, that's CFOs, MDs, CEOs, training and development heads. And then you need to look at what spaces that they're operating in. And sadly, not a lot of them are operating in Instagram. If you want to be on, I'm still probably more active on Instagram than anywhere else, just because it's nice and visual. But realistically, those guys are most active across LinkedIn and Twitter. So I think there's a hell of a lot, I was about to swear there, so there's a hell of a lot of space on LinkedIn for development. I think LinkedIn needs to be certainly treated more as a social media platform, unless as a business platform, and I think there's a lot more scope for that. But social media, in terms of platforms I use, would be LinkedIn and Twitter. That's where most of my leads have come from. And then in terms of the content is really just about leading with value, and just instead of like DMing people and dropping people messages and all that, if you just take a percentage of your knowledge, break it up as much as you can, and there's some really cool techniques to do that. But so for example, I write an article for The Buyer. It's an online publication. And I take an article, and that one article is what I call like a pillar piece, and that will last me 4 weeks. And I do sort of 3 or 4 breakout micro pieces from that. Each one of those micro pieces dictates a weekly blog, and then from that blog I dictate 7 days or 5 to 7 days worth of social media content, and then that goes across my mainly Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn profiles. So that's kind of the long answer to that, wasn't it? I'm sorry.
And then, like, in terms of each platform, do you then have to analyze the metrics? Do you look at the reach? Is that something? Because I couldn't think of anything worse than doing that myself. But
well, I think as far as I go is Instagram and looking when people following you are most active, and you can do that quite within a couple of pushes of your screen. So I think around anything from like 5 till 8 p.m. is always a good time to post for our industry on LinkedIn. I certainly don't have a huge Instagram following, but I've got a couple of leads from it. So for me, it's more about quality over quantity. And LinkedIn is really, I've found, and I've spoken to a couple of LinkedIn sort of gurus and mentors, never do more than 3 hashtags on LinkedIn. Try and tag in people, try and ask questions. So always ask a question, and it just tends to engage people a little bit more and just get that conversation flowing. And the more people are engaging with your posts, the more your posts get seen. I mean, I've sort of started to follow the school of Gary Vaynerchuk. Do you know? So he's a bit of a guru. He's incredible. Be happy to send out some of his pieces that were given to me for free. So I'd be happy to share it with everyone. And basically, he took a picture of his knee while he was driving. And basically, he wrote a plan on how he could pump out 72 pieces of content across all of his social media platforms just from a photo of his knee. So, in that sense, if you take that, dial it in a little bit. Obviously, we haven't got the time to do that. But if you dial that in a little bit, then actually you can get a lot of content just from one pillar, sort of solid piece, if that makes sense. But yeah, certainly for getting business, I think LinkedIn and Twitter are where you want to be.
And Rebekkah, you were going to add something on the metrics.
From the metrics and just in terms of different platforms, I think one myth is that Facebook is dead. Certainly, I think a lot of people feel like we've moved on. But in terms of the most popular social media platforms, Facebook is still number 1 globally in terms of users. Instagram is the fastest growing, followed by YouTube, followed by Facebook. The demographic is different. So on Instagram, especially for hospitality, you're most likely to find people between the ages of 25 and 34. And then your secondary audience will be 35 to 44. Facebook is going to be more of that 35 to 44 plus. So depending on what audience you're trying to appeal for, if we're looking at TikTok, if you want to appeal to teenagers, which I don't think most of us do, that's your platform. And then Harry mentioned Twitter, which I think a lot of people don't think about. But actually on Twitter, hospitality, food and drink content takes up a 30% market share of what people are tweeting about. So it is the most popular topic for people to talk about on Twitter. I think after that, it's something like clothing, fashion, beauty. But food and drink is the #1 topic on Twitter. And then in terms of metrics, all of these platforms come with analytics and insights. So Instagram, you can find out who your audience is, their gender, their location, and their age. As Harry said as well, the times that they're online, which is almost always between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., which is when people are at work. So that's when people are most likely to be looking at Instagram on their phone. Another really cool way to use Instagram Insights is to see which content is performing the best in terms of engagement, interaction, and reach. So we see what performs the best, we do more of that. We see what performs the worst, we do less of that. If you want to take it further, use Google Analytics to see how your social media is driving people to your website. Often marketing is seen as this like intangible thing in the air, but actually we can measure it. And the best measure of success is if it's increasing footfall and revenue, because otherwise, I mean, what Harry and I do is slightly different because we don't have a bricks and mortar venue, but if you do, you want to see your social media activity translating into footfall and increased revenue, and you measure that through analytics. So how many people is Instagram sending to your website, sending to your bookings, and then you can take it further with CRM, what is the spend per head of those bookings. So you can measure how many hours you spend on your Instagram and how many pounds per minute you get for that. So it is actually very tangible if you want to dive into it that deeply.
How far down the rabbit hole you want to
Depends
go.
how interested
I think
you are.
just to add on from the Facebook side of things, I think a great way to sort of use or sort of fall back in love with Facebook is to start a closed group. And I think most of you will know the London Bartenders Association is probably the best example I can give you of that. But if you start up a closed group, be quite specific with it if you can, because people are looking for specialists and not generalists. But if you can be quite specific with it, then what you create there is quite a warm/hot audience, and then with that, you can do quite a lot with that going forwards, and just build up your own community. And that might be a nicer way just to re-engage with Facebook. I certainly don't use it much on a personal level anymore, but I think having those warm groups that you're part of are a good way to just re-engage with the platform. Really.
Some really good answers there, and it just made me think back. We're talking about metrics, we're talking about what works. I remember a bar trade pre-social media where we used to have to go out flyering on the streets. And doing quite a lot of flyering as well, and you'd be opening a bar, and so you'd be going around bars, dropping off flyers, and this sounds a lot smarter. Maybe I should get better at it. The next question is going to be back at you, Rebekkah, and this is really working with other people in your community, whether you want to use the term collaborative, whether they're competitors, support network, just coming at the collaborative angle.
I think collaboration is so important. When we talk about growing our social media platforms, the best way to do that is by working with other people and reaching their audience. But just in terms of enriching your own experience and your own education, if you can work with people from different disciplines, different skill bases, to kind of benefit whatever it is that you're offering, and you can pick up a bit from them. So I think collaborating is, it's a really important thing to do. Like when we see bars collaborate with brands, like on an event or a product, scarcity is also a big part of that. So the coolest things are always the things that we can't all get. We did that with Discards, only printing 250 copies. But I think collaborating is an essential part of any successful marketing strategy and business. And it's just fun. It's always fun to do.
Stronger together.
Yeah, 100%.
Sort of, yeah. You're stronger together. If you jump on board with other brands, you share everything, and it's better.
There's a very particular type of collaboration that is often used, and just really want to get your opinion, Rebekkah, on its worth, and that is a lot of bartenders will try and grow their persona in the industry by doing guest bartending, but also a lot of venues will go to different countries as well to do guest visits to grow their own persona as well as a venue. how worthwhile as a rabbit hole is that to go down?
I think if it's fun, then it's 100% worth it. But I think one thing, because we did a lot of guest bartender things for the Dead Rabbit, so it's an interesting idea. If we send a Dead Rabbit bartender to a bar in Russia, that bar gets loads of footfall, loads of press, but when our bartender leaves, what happens? Because they're not, the guests that come into that event are not getting a proper experience of that bar. It's a fun night, but are you really adding any value to your bar? Or are you just showcasing someone else's bartender? So if it's fun, then I think it's all worthwhile. We work in the hospitality industry. We should always be thinking about whether or not people are having fun. It's the most important thing. I mean, maybe on a level with money. But I think there's definitely beneficial sides to it, but it should be thought of a bit more than like, oh, let's just send this bartender over here and it'll, yeah. Like, is it actually going to work for your brand?
Yeah, okay, good. So keeping it smart and having it measurable and also making sure your own venue doesn't suffer is quite important there. Harry, we're going to go to you now, and we're talking about building a personal brand. Over the period from you working in restaurants to now having your own business, your own name is your own income, have you changed along the way your own brand?
Yeah, so when I was working as a wine director, I sort of had a Britney moment and just walked out. I definitely shouldn't have done that. Said, I'll go freelance and thought it would be easy, and it was shit. It was horrible. So the first year was tough. Then I started, I was doing my consulting, and the aforementioned cocktail-led business models were certainly in need of a lot of wine knowledge and wine help. And actually, I realised that this was a bit more systemic, so I actually used the LBA to put out some questionnaires. And the most sort of telling stat that I got back was 85% of London-based bartenders receive a wine training once a year or less. And for me, that wasn't right. Particularly as London is a destination, probably the capital city in the world for cocktails. Why shouldn't the bartenders at least be able to tell me a bit about wine, right? So I started Grain to Grape. Got some sponsorship from Moet Hennessy, and it was very much a non-profit. I took quite a lot of inspiration from Rebekkah with the London sessions, and asked you a couple of questions I think along the way. And yeah, it was just I just wanted to do something nice and philanthropical for the trade, and then basically I started to be approached by certain wine suppliers to roll out trainings for them, and they essentially started circumnavigating their own training teams and coming to me. Going forwards, I picked up some great contracts, and then obviously COVID happened. I lost a lot of business. So I had to really rethink what I was doing. So I've spent the last 18 months relaunching Grain to Grape as an e-learning platform. I'm working with Flow Hospitality. But in terms of pivoting the brand, I started working with a branding specialist earlier on this year. And he rewrote me a brand DNA. And I got this brand DNA in February, and it's been up on my laptop since February. And I wrote a couple of points of it down. Not all of them, but there's some really important points that anyone that wants to start their own brand or just figure out their brand tone of voice, I think is really important. So for me, the first one is the granny test. So the granny test is, what are you doing, and would your grandma understand it if she asked you what you were doing? So for me, Grain to Grape is modern, profitable wine training that helps restaurants sell better wine more often. Okay? I could wax lyrical all day about what I do, but in a sentence or two, that's it. So that's sort of the granny test. Next, you need to identify your audiences. Kind of touched on that earlier. I tried to be active across Twitter and LinkedIn because that's where a lot of those decision makers are, and that's where I've got most of my inbound leads from. So certainly identify your audiences. Also identify your motivations. What are your motivations? My motivations as a brand are stop the customer boredom. Stop, as a restaurant manager, when you're looking out and you're seeing the same wine on half your tables. That's boring. We want different wine in front of the customers all the time. So stop that boredom. Stop the team boredom. I'm so bored of wine suppliers going into businesses and talking shit about soil and oak for an hour until everyone falls asleep. You leave a bunch of tech sheets on the table and they end up on the floor in the locker room at the end of shift. It doesn't work. But if you do wine training in a way that's more engaging, you're going to have a much better success rate. So what are your motivations? use that to feed your social media messages, and that's when you start hitting the pain points with your target audiences, who I just mentioned. USPs, always make sure you've got your USPs, but most importantly, make sure your USPs are defendable. So it's okay, it's all good and well having a USP, but can you defend that USP? And I think that's really, really important. And then vision and mission, and this is what, for me, I never understood, and for me is what really helped. Your vision is what you're never going to achieve. Okay, so for me, my vision is to make everyone in hospitality wine confident. I will not do that, all right? But that is my vision. And my mission is, what do I do on a day-to-day basis to work towards my vision? And that's really important. So your mission, I think, mission statement for me, certainly as a personal brand, dictates what I do on a Monday to Friday, usually, well, actually Monday to Sunday, to work towards my vision. And that's you know, you want your brand DNA piece, and you want to work on your brand DNA I've gone massively over time here, haven't I? Sorry. But yeah, it's a really important thing to know who you are and to know where you are. You need to centralize yourself. Like I said before, be a specialist, not a generalist. No one wants a generalist. I think the time of bar consultants, wine consultants, it's really tough. Like, you know, people have still got staff on furlough. You know, coming in as a consultant on a £300 a day rate or whatever it is tough right now. But if you can be a specialist in something, you know, I like to think that now a lot of people are coming to me for profitable wine training. How do you take a customer from a 20 to a £30 bottle like that? You know, that's what I think people come to me for now. But, you know, that does take time, but that's all rooted in having a brand DNA, and that's the most important piece of it.
And I think one line that Harry said that's really important there is you have to know who you are yourself. You know, if you don't understand yourself, how will anyone else? So that's a very good sentiment. We're just coming up to the last topic here, which is going to be towards you, Rebekkah, and it's an interesting one. It's how do you separate your personal life from your own personal brand? Do you separate it? Is it the same? Go for it.
Yeah, I asked Declan to ask me this question because it's something I feel quite strongly about. So this might be a bit of a rant. But I think if we think like 10 years ago, when brand ambassadors, 15 years ago, when brand ambassadors and social media became so prevalent, we were telling brand ambassadors they needed to embody their brand. And that means if you're literally a brand ambassador or you're just an ambassador for the brand that you work for, either way, you had to live and breathe that brand. And I think in the past 5 years or 3 years, that's really changed. What people seek now is genuine, authentic connection and a sense of community. And post-COVID, that has only increased. So this idea, and I think this idea comes with a lot of pressure, that we have to represent this side of ourselves that's perfectly manicured and curated and represents our brand in this impeccable way, is actually really outdated. And it's commercially ineffective because people don't engage with that anymore. So I think it's really important to make that distinction rather than trying to plan our social media grids a month, 2 months, 3 months in advance for ourselves, to remember that even if we want to be a brand and an individual, we are people, and people are messy, and you can't plan your Instagram 3 months in advance. So I would just take all that pressure off because it doesn't work. It might look pretty, and it's also going to drive you crazy. And also, if you have insights on your personal Instagram, if you have a professional account or a business account, you'll be able to access the insights. Don't use those for your personal brand, because you shouldn't be sharing things on Instagram based on what your followers relate to. From a personal level, you should be sharing what you want to share and not getting validation from likes and reach. For you. For your brand, like, absolutely do that. But if you want to market yourself, I just think it's really important to tread that line very carefully, because it's not a nice place to be in. That's it. Thanks, Declan.
No, perfectly answered, and I think there's a really good sentiment there. And we are in a great day and age where people have power and people buy people. Whether you're a bar, a brand, doing bottled cocktails, it is going to be the people behind it that people invest in now, and having that social media gives you that opportunity to show the real you, your nuances, whilst obviously being select at the odd thing as well. So I think really good answering, Rebekkah. That's all of our planned questions, but the time now was to go to a bit of a Q&A, and I think we've got a roaming mic for that. Am I right, Joe? So who would like to ask some questions at Rebekkah and Harry? Not me.
Or Declan. Oh,
there we go. Thank you.
A question for both of you, I suppose. For like a new business starting out with like completely very little following whatsoever, have you got any sort of tricks of the trade in how to sort of kickstart a bit of traction on social media? I've seen you can do sponsored posts and this kind of thing, but is there any other sort of techniques that you would
I think going back to what Harry said, before you start communicating your brand, you need to make sure it's perfectly assembled. So the best way of doing that, I'm not sure what you called it, but it's the same idea of being able to summarize what you do in one sentence or 150 characters, your Instagram bio. So before you start communicating that information, just ensuring you're really confident in what it is that you do. A thing that I've always used whenever I launch something new is Facebook groups. And I know we spoke about actually the importance of Facebook. Any project that I've done, when I've looked at the website analytics, the majority of traffic comes from Facebook. Not Instagram, not Twitter, not sponsored posts, Facebook groups. So I don't know, you sound like you might not be from London, but London Bartenders Association, I know there's depending on what region you're in, there will be a group that has like between 10 and 20, 25,000 people in it. Capitalize on that, and it's free. Yeah.
Just to his point, what about sponsored? Do you recommend doing sponsored?
I wouldn't do it early on in your marketing strategy, but certainly if there's something specific that you want to boost, then do it. But make sure you have a full understanding, because you can really easily just pour money down the drain with these things, and also do it like 10, 15, 20 pounds first, and see what results you get from it. Before you put like 500 quid behind it, see if it's actually working for you. And what you want to see generated by that is website clicks. So actual results, not just 20,000 people saw this. What did they do when they saw it?
And do you plan to run the social media yourself? Yeah. And would you encourage, I think it's just a really good question, would you encourage using third parties, Rebekkah, for that? Or do it yourself?
I mean, I am a third party, so I do like tone of voice and content, but no, not at the beginning. Like if you're like, if this is a small thing and it's you know your brand better than anyone else. You know your tone of voice better than anyone else, because you probably are your tone of voice. So I would stay at such an early stage in your journey. Do it all yourself, and it's actually a really good way for you to get to know the social media platforms that you're using and your audience. Any challenges that you come across, you'll adapt and learn how to overcome them. So early on, no, you don't need third-party people.
In the business I work for, we're a spirit brand, and the ability for us managing social media ourselves is really important because of the amount of comments and questions, and we don't want a third party to be the one responsible for that. We want to be the one replying to them all, reading it all, and you just get a real good vibe for things that way as well. But good question, and good luck as well. That must be terrifying. Any more questions from the floor here? Up next.
Hi there, Fran Bridgewater from Wine Jobs GV, among other things. Just wanted to ask about Instagram Live. And you talked about the hours that were good for using Instagram in particular. Is there a particular time that Instagram Live doesn't, because there's a rush hour as well, that's kind of 6 to 7 p.m, and whether there's then a dilution of message. Just wondered what you would recommend, how much you rate it generally. Thank you.
Do you want to both do this? So I don't know that information. It will be available online. I would say in terms of the tools that are available on Instagram, grid posts, story highlights, IGTV, Instagram Live, and Reels. Reels is the most effective one right now because it's new. So whenever Instagram releases its newest tool, that is going to be the one that the algorithm favors. So everyone should be using Reels right now. They appear on the Discover page. They are more likely to reach more people than your story highlights, than your grid post, probably combined. So definitely look into that. I'm not sure about Instagram Live, but Google it. There are marketing companies their whole business is based around collating and sharing this information. If you're ever not sure about anything, just look it up.
Instagram Live just reminds me of lockdown and getting asked to do them. It's nice being here in person.
Yeah.
We've got time for one more question for the floor.
For Declan.
I don't have the answer.
Really?
Oh, crap.
I'll put Declan in the hot seat. How have you found moving from representing a venue, bricks and mortar bar, to representing a brand? How have you found that change in terms of your own personal positioning in your career?
I think really good question, and I think really to Rebekkah's point, just keep it the same, and nothing has changed in my life. Well, lots of things have changed, but we're all working with people, and whether you're working in a small independent bar or a big, large organisation like the Savoy, which Michaeli works in, or now to go and work in a spirit brand, for me it's all the same, and it's just about keeping your own integrity as a worker, acting yourself, and all the little changes are wallpaper, but your own career and development is always the same. And what I've just enjoyed now is joining a smaller business. There are challenges in other areas, but I've enjoyed just going into a smaller business where when we believe in something, we can act on it much quicker, and that's something that thrills me a lot. But in terms of me and my own persona, just try and keep that consistent so people know what they get, the good and the bad bits. Right, well, that is all the questions, and thank you very much. We're really pleased with this turnout as well. Thanks a lot.